Hey, Mike, how are you doing?
How you doing, man?
Absolutely wonderful. Well, we got a lot to cover, and I know time is at a premium, so I'll jump right to it. I know a lot of people have said that you're sort of out there right now, like a man coming out of a 20-year marriage, dating everyone in sight. But the truth is, you've always had multiple projects going on. So my first question is, when do you sleep?
Believe it or not, I'm a heavy sleeper. I could sleep 14 hours at a time. I just happen to do it at the different hours from the rest of the world. No, I mean, you bring up a valid point. Everybody thinks like, oh my God, he's doing all these things now that he's not with Dream Theater. But I always did this much when I was with Dream Theater. And on top of that, juggled the entire Dream Theater juggernaut on top of that. So this is nothing new for me, really. I'm just doing what I've always done, and that's making music and working with lots of different people. And, it's nothing new. I guess maybe it's just slightly magnified now because I'm not with Dream Theater. But really, I'm just doing what I've always done.
And next month, you have two new albums coming out, one for Adrenaline Mob and, of course, Flying Colors. But let's talk about Flying Colors first. I know you've worked with Neil Morse and David LaRue before, but how did the hardest working drummer in music and the hardest working guitarist connect for this project?
Yeah, working with Steve, first and foremost, is something that I've always wanted to do. I've always been a big fan of Steve's playing, dating back to the Dixie Dregs and the Steve Morse Band in the 80s, and then, followed him when he was playing with Kansas in the mid-80s. And, we've gotten to know each other through the years, touring together, because Dream Theater toured with Deep Purple in 98, and then the Dixie Dregs toured with Dream Theater in 2000. So Steve and I had always had a friendship and a personal relationship, but this is the first time we've been able to make music together. And, it's been an honor for me to sit in the same room and collaborate, and seeing his genius firsthand. And like you mentioned, I'd already done so much work with Neil and Dave. Neil and I have done, maybe a dozen albums now, through the years between Transatlantic and Yellow Matter Custard and his solo albums. And then Dave and I had done, I think like 6 G3 tours through the years, and he also played in my Zeppelin tribute band. So yeah, there were existing relationships with everybody, and putting us all in the same room and doing this was really a magical experience. Neil and I kind of have done so much together, and Steve and Dave have done so much together, but you put us all together, and it created all new directions for each of us.
Now, Casey McPherson I hadn't heard of before, and he's got an incredibly diverse and emotive voice. How'd you find him?
I first heard Casey when a friend of mine turned me on to the Indochine album in the early 2000s. I've always been a big fan of power pop music, bands like Jellyfish and Weezer and Radiohead. And a friend of mine knew my love for that type of music and turned me on to the Indochine album, and I was immediately floored by it. And it became one of my favorite albums of the decade. And then I followed Casey's career once, he went and formed Alpha Rev. And a couple of years ago, he and I crossed paths and became friends. I told him how much of a fan I was and how much I've been following his career and how much I think he's an amazing talent, but had still been undiscovered and not recognized. So he and I became friends, and once we established in Flying Colors that Neil wasn't going to be the lead voice and we wanted somebody else to take that role, I immediately suggested Casey, and it turned out to be the magical element that we needed to take us all to all new places. And hopefully this album will give Casey the recognition that his talents have always deserved.
Absolutely, I certainly hope so, because like I said, it's an incredibly great, a wonderful voice. And the band name comes from the track on the album The Storm, or vice versa, I'm not sure, but it seems very fitting. The music is so diverse and full of so many elements that just seem to swirl around like a tornado of flying colors. How'd you guys pick the name?
I think it was Peter Collins, the producer, that actually pointed out that phrase from the song and suggested it as a band name. And we would sit around the dinner table every night during the session and kick around, dozens of band names, and some of them were great and some of them were horrible. but never did all of us agree on any of them. You know, there was always somebody that objected to any given band name that was suggested, until Flying Colors was thrown out there by Peter. And that was the only name that all five of us totally loved and thought was perfect. So it was obvious that that was the one, and it was so fitting. Not to mention the fact that Steve Morse is a pilot, so I think that's what sold him on it.
Right. I saw that he was actually a commercial pilot for a while there. Now, with so much talent in the band, how did the songwriting process work amongst you, and what was sort of the musical goals when you guys created this band?
Well, the musical goals were to not do what was expected. You know, Neil and I have already done so many albums together, and Steve and Dave have done so many together, like I've already said. And we didn't want to do anything that was going to just sound like another Transatlantic or another Dixie Dregs album. So the goal musically was to take all of our experience and our playing abilities, but go to new places. And Kate, like I've already said, once again, Casey was definitely the factor that took us there. And as far as the process itself, it was a lot of collaboration. You know, there were cases where some existing bits and pieces and progressions and melodies were brought in by maybe one person or whatever, but everything that's on this album was collaborated upon by the five of us and Peter Collins. And I think that's what made this album so enjoyable, that everybody has their hands in it. And at first, I thought that was a recipe for disaster. It was like, oh my God, you know, me and Neil and Casey and Steve are all very used to having control and, you know, self-producing and things like that. And then you throw Peter Collins in, and it's like, I thought this was a recipe for disaster with too many chefs in the kitchen. But somehow, miraculously, it turned out to be a smooth, happy, and creative process that everybody thoroughly enjoyed.
And the product speaks for itself. The album is just... I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day, and it's like listening to the album. It's like listening to everything you've ever heard in ways that you've never heard it before.
That's an absolutely great analogy. I love it. Yeah, I agree. That's awesome.
And one of my personal favorites on the album is Love Is What I'm Waiting For, which to me feels like the offspring of a Beatles-Queen coupling.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one that Casey brought in, and that's a perfect example of that power pop sensibility that I've always loved about Casey, and I was so glad that we got to tap into it with this song. You know, the Beatles are my favorite bands of all time, and Queen is surely up there as well. So to tap into that kind of vibe and production was really a lot of fun.
Now, of course, you love all the songs on the album, but are there one or two tracks that are particularly special for you?
I can't say that there are, because every track is so different from each other. You know, you have something like The Storm, which gives like almost a Coldplay, U2 kind of feeling. Then you have something like All Falls Down, which is fully bombastic and you know, this crazy over-the-top playing. And then something like Infinite Fire is more epic. Fool in My Heart is, you know, another one of those Beatles-type songs, and I got to sing lead vocal on that, so that was kind of special to me. You know, they each have such unique personalities that I don't think I could pick one particular track. It's one of those albums where you need to hear the sum of all its parts to really appreciate what the band and the album is about.
Absolutely. Now, with Steve and Neil and yourself involved in so many other projects, and the other guys as well, will there be any touring?
Well, we're all hoping for it. You know, we all absolutely would love to get on stage and play the stuff live and share the chemistry with the fans. It's just, you know, the scheduling is going to be the hardest thing to try to manage, and everybody's got so many different things going on. And obviously Steve is at the mercy of Deep Purple's schedule, which he doesn't really control. So, you know, it's just it took a while to get the five of us into the studio, so it may take a little while to get the five of us on stage, but it will absolutely happen. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when.